Most people don't just wake up one day and discover that they're deep in debt. This is something that builds over time. Today, we're going to talk to a former financial counselor to hear some real stories about how people find themselves sliding deeper and deeper into debt. Let's get into it. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Dollars and Cents, Hapo Community Credit Union's financial literacy podcast. Today, we're going to be covering a topic with our guest, Chris Dlugozima, who is another podcast host with GreenPath. But before starting his podcast, Real Stories, he was also a financial counselor with GreenPath. Those of you out there have probably heard us talk about GreenPath before. This is a service that Hapo partners with for debt consolidation and counseling. Chris, welcome to the podcast. Give us a quick history of your time with GreenPath and what you've done, and then we'll jump into the topic of how debt doesn't exactly just show up on your doorstep one day, unless, of course, you had some major life crisis impact. But most debt just kind of builds over time. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Scott, thanks for having me on. It's nice to flip the seat around and be the one interviewed. So, I've been with GreenPath for longer than it'll actually be 25 years in a few weeks. Believe it or not. First real job out of college. I was a financial counselor for nearly a decade, mostly out of our New York City locations. So you just imagine a high cost area like Manhattan. Some of the struggles that people were going through. I eventually transitioned over to our education team, where for a number of years I was out in the community giving workshops on various personal finance topics. And more recently, in the last 5 or 6 years, I've transitioned to more of a digital role, and that includes the GreenPath Real Stories or Journeys of Financial Wellness podcast. And I've gotten such a great opportunity to speak to so many people about their journeys, their struggles, and their triumphs.
Excellent. Well, we're excited to have you on here. One of the things that we aim for with our own podcast is to get some of those real stories out there, to let people know that you are not the only person going through something like this. Oftentimes we find that members that we speak with feel almost embarrassed about the situation or the topic, or not necessarily confident in going, like somebody is going to make them feel bad about the scenario that they're in. And I feel like these real topics, these real conversations that we have kind of help people understand that the counselors that are out there that are attempting to help, they really do want to see you succeed. I'm assuming that from your career path and your trajectory, that was the entire goal all the time.
Yeah, and actually, that was the whole intent of the podcast itself. So I remember so many times in my counseling sessions that I had over the years, you just picture someone is coming in and there's such shame, there's such stress. They close, you close the door, and it's just this, oftentimes just the release of just sharing their situation. And most of the time, by the end of that session, there was just such relief that they have possibilities, that they have a path that they could go down. And so often I would get this question of, this must be the worst situation you've ever seen. And I realized, of course I'm getting that, because it's just not, money is, especially struggles with money, is not something that is commonly talked about in our culture. And so with podcasts, my whole goal was to say, hey, can we take those, in essence, private conversations and bring them into the public to show everyone that a lot of people are in the same boat. You're not alone.
Yeah, definitely. This is one of those things that money happens in everybody's life, and how well you manage that from one person to the next. There's so many people in the world that not everybody can be out here crushing it and becoming a billionaire, obviously. But even just getting, out of that paycheck to paycheck cycle, finding ways out of the ever increasing costs of things. This is one of those things that you're right. It doesn't get talked about enough, at least publicly. And this is a great thing for people to know that, hey, you're definitely not the only one that's going through stuff like this, and that there's resources out there for people to work with. So, in the time that you've been counseling, doing your podcast out there, what are some of the themes that you've seen across the board, or regular items that keep showing up that kind of are indicators that people might be moving in the wrong direction?
There's, one of the phrases that always rings in my head is like debt doesn't discriminate, right? And so there's so many different types of causes that could happen, right? If we look at the root causes, it could be some combination of something happening on the income side, whether it's temporary like job loss, whether it's overspending, whether it's both, inflation. Sometimes it creeps up, sometimes it's an ongoing thing. Debt, mathematically is going to happen when you spend more than you make, of course. But then we kind of look at like the actual signs themselves, and there's a lot of them. Some people will come in with debts that they haven't addressed in a good while, and it's easy to lose track of things when accounts bounce around from collection agency to collection agency. You're often getting phone calls from unknown sources. You're getting letters from places you may have never have heard of. And especially if you don't have the money to address it, it's easy to just sort of bury your head in the sand. And so I could often tell that, sometimes someone will come in with like a plastic bag full of half opened or even unopened mail, right? And like they know it's there, they put it in a pile, but it's a hard thing to face. And I remember there were actually some sessions where we would sit there in the session and open it all up, and a lot of it would just be to kind of organize what's out there. So that's one for sure. Another one is
Kind of moving away from that out of sight, out of mind.
slowly but surely, right? And or on the flip side, people move, of course, and collectors aren't always privy to where someone is. So there are people that know they owe the money, and GreenPath, we will pull the credit report, we'll do a soft pull and find out what's going on. But that might be the first time the person is really learning their situation as to what's happening, because they may not be getting regular communication when it comes to that. That's one of the good changes in recent years, is that people do generally have a lot more accessible ways to check their credit report. But back when I was first starting, that was certainly not the case nearly as much. So
I had a question I was formulating. We're going to, I want to say it was probably along the lines of talking about that mail, seeing where things are and realizing that it's just kind of creeping up, and that kind of putting it aside to deal with it later mentality that kind of comes along with this. This is a stressful thing. I'll set this over here. I'll come back to it, I swear. And then a month has gone by and you realize you've gotten another letter and you're looking at it. That level of stress building up could probably be a pretty heavy thing. Like you mentioned previously, people suddenly having that relief of sharing it and facing that debt that's been mounting up. In situations like this, how often do you see that these are people that are making payments regularly, but they're only making, say, a minimum payment, and this debt just keeps building and building? Or is this regularly, when like you mentioned, when collections are getting involved, people that are missing payments?
yeah, we see both, right? So certainly there's those that have not been able to pay their debts in some time, but it is just as common for someone to be completely on top of all their bills. Let's just give the example of credit cards. They're making all their payments. Maybe they're making minimum payments, but oftentimes they're still having to use the card for everyday needs, right? So, you take a look, and oftentimes back when I was a counselor, a lot of the counseling was done in person. Nowadays, it's almost exclusively done over the phone. But I would look at statements, and I would just, you could just kind of see, wow, this is nothing extravagant, right? They're just trying to live, essentially, in many ways. And that's a situation where there is some awareness, but if you're using the cards on an everyday basis and you're making all the payments on time, it's almost this false sense of security as to say, like, well, it's going well, it's going okay. Maybe you in the back of your mind know it's creeping up. And one of the things that causes people to reach out to us is when they could see sort of that limit is almost there, like their cards are about maxed out or maybe have already been maxed out. And then they realize if I don't take action soon, I'm going to have trouble keeping up with those monthly payments.
With those, how often are you seeing those people that they're starting to reach that limit and their next move, instead of making a change, is to go and open another one, get another credit line that they can work on until that doesn't work, and therefore now they're getting not approved for their next card, and now they're pretty much stuck in a scenario.
Yeah, and that's the weird part of it, is that the more resourceful someone is as to finding other alternatives like that, whether it's opening up a new account, doing a balance transfer, taking out a loan against one's 401k or something similar. These are people that are, when they do this, it makes all the sense in the world on the surface, because they might be getting better interest rates, they might be getting better payments or other terms. But at some point, if the root cause of what's leading the debt to accumulate is not addressed, you're kind of, not only you right back in the same place, you're actually in a worse place, because now you might have two sets of debts at the end of the day. Like consolidation loans, that's another big one, right? Where, yeah, wow, my credit card interests are at 25%. I take out a consolidation loan at 12%. That's a no-brainer. Yes, but if it hasn't been addressed, now you might have a consolidation loan plus new credit card debt that eventually creeps up.
Yeah, all of those tools that you mentioned are fantastic financial tools. Using a balance transfer to get to a lower rate, using a consolidation loan to get to a lower rate. Those are all great tools. But like you mentioned, if you're only paying that minimum payment and you're just accumulating debt, then you haven't dealt with the root source of the problem. And you're using great tools, which honestly people should be taking advantage of out there. It's going to save you some money in the long run on interest. But if you're only making that low, you're opening yourself up to just the problem continuing, maybe just building a little bit slower if you've got that lower interest rate.
Yeah, and it's just this mirage, in a sense. And that's one of the harsh things of, like, one of the long-term options that organizations like GreenPath offer is something called a debt management plan. And for that to be successful, the cards have to be shut down, which means we have to kind of go back to the budget to make sure there's room for that, for the debt, but obviously the rest of your life, right? To make sure you're still covering your housing, if you have a car payment, etc. And so suddenly it could be, sometimes it's a surprise, right? Where someone is like, oh, I'm on time with all my bills. And then we analyze to see if a debt management plan could work. And then suddenly that's unaffordable, because in that scenario, you're cut off from borrowing additional money for it to work.
What other scenarios do you see that kind of lead people into these scenarios where they finally need to get into that debt management program, other than just like standard lifestyle creep, cycling debt around to use one debt to pay off another one? Are there other scenarios that you see regularly that get people into these debt management programs?
Well, you just think of the different unexpected things that life could throw at someone. So one would be medical debt. And it may or may not be in the form of medical debt. It could be like they actually have medical bills that have gone to collections. But it could also just be of maybe they put some of their medical bills on a credit card, or maybe all of their money went towards their ongoing medical expenses, leaving the rest of their lifestyle, just basic necessities to go on credit cards. But that could be the root cause. That obviously could also affect one's income, of course, when someone's dealing with an ongoing medical situation. The sky's the limit as to like the cause, but sometimes they're like these financial shocks that then can be difficult to rebound from. We see a lot of small businesses, right? Especially when someone's small business is getting off the ground. Even if the business itself is a separate legal entity from the individual, at the end of the day, it's like it's commingled. One thing affects the other, and we actually do see commingling sometimes, which is its own thing that could get people in trouble.
So it's not necessarily just all sweat equity that you're putting into getting that business up and off the ground. Oftentimes that's your own capital that you're putting into the business. Take out a small personal loan or something to be able to fund something to get that business up and running. I know oftentimes you hear that like the first couple years of a small business, you expect it to run at a loss, which means if you can't find a way to turn that corner and start making money, you basically are still underwater from opening the business. And whether you built that out correctly as a limited liability corporation or something along those lines to help shelter yourself from those debts, like you said, as a separate entity, yeah, you can easily still be in there. I've heard of a number of stories of people who are like, yeah, well, we sold the house so we could get the money to open the business. Okay, well, here's hoping that's successful. You put all your eggs in one basket and like, here, put the effort in. I hope it works out for you. But if it doesn't, we're going to be in a pretty deep hole to try and dig ourselves out of. With the debt management programs, how often do you guys see success coming from these stories where people are getting into them, where they actually follow the plan? Is it a pretty regularly successful event when people get in there?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually just hit, we're actively helping 50,000 people manage their debt management programs around the country. And the vast majority of them have success. Like anything else, life is still going to happen, right? If someone loses their job, if someone has a financial shock while they're on one of these programs, it's going to affect their ability to pay us and then filter that money down to their creditors. But it's set up in such a way where it's doing a few things, right? It's creating a structure where oftentimes people are juggling multiple bills when they're handling their debts on their own. Whereas when you're on a debt management program, you're able to put all your payments together. So just from that standpoint, it makes it easier. You're having your payments tied to your pay period. So if I'm paid biweekly, I can make a biweekly payment. But then there's also like the support, the coaching that you receive along the way. So then as life happens, you can reach out to us and we can help you navigate that. And that is the one thing, is very rarely does these programs can last upwards of 5 years. Very rarely is someone just complete smooth sailing the entire time. There's usually some stumble along the way, but those that are proactive, that can get ahead of it or reach out to us as soon as those things happen, we could help them to navigate that and push through and hopefully continue to make it work.
Yeah, I've heard that with a lot of departments that are like, hey, if you come into a financial hardship, if you get furloughed, if you get laid off, something like that, the best thing that you can do is reach out early and explain that scenario. I know our collections department, our risk mitigation, have all said basically the best thing you can do is reach out to us. The worst thing you can do is just start skipping payments, because there's a certain point where we can't do anything to assist you beyond what you've already done. But if you get in touch with us right out of the gate, we're more than happy to make something work. And I feel like that's a situation with a lot of places. Like as soon as, if you're going to be upfront and tell them, hey, I've got this issue, my income is basically been cut off for the next couple of months while I get back on my feet. Can we make a payment plan? Can we do something to help mitigate so that this doesn't go to a collection scenario?
Yeah, and you imagine someone who's juggling multiple bills. We're able to work with multiple creditors then and find out which ones might have more flexibility than others. Oftentimes we'll have a scenario where someone has a little bit of a cushion in their account. And so, as an example, if someone is paying us biweekly, every 6 months or so, there's an extra payment that's essentially in there. So that can help cushion against if someone needs to skip a payment, it may not even have any consequences on their creditor payments, as an example. But it's one of those things where, the more proactive someone is, then the easier it is for us to figure that out.
I mean, that's right up there with the idea in budgeting of putting money aside into an emergency account, emergency savings for when these random glitches or these random life events crop up, so that you can actually kind of absorb that cost a little bit better. It's effectively that same idea. You're getting that extra buffer. I do the same thing with my payments, like my car payment. I round that up regularly. And so as I transfer money into and out of accounts, say I'm supposed to be paying $275 for my monthly car payment, I'll put $300 into the account. And over time, that extra 25 just keeps adding up as a kind of a hidden savings account because I can handle that type of an extra boon pushed into that account. And over a year or two, you find that, hey, I have more than enough in here saved up for 2 or 3 extra payments if it came to that.
Yeah, think about that, right? Yeah, if something unexpected comes up, or even if something fun comes up, you have a vacation, you have the holidays, whatever the case is, then you could have that leeway if you wanted to. So,
Is there any sort of a common theme amongst the people that you've worked with and talked to on the podcast about what their realization moment was, that light bulb moment where they turned around, they were just like, I can't do this on my own at this point in time. This has gotten out of control, and I need to go seek out some sort of assistance.
it's funny. So when I was a counselor, there one theme that I would see is one of two things. It was either sort of like they've reached their limit, right? They're about to be cut off, or sort of the scenario where they're starting to get collection calls. They're, just aggressive collection tactics. But it's also one of the things that on the podcast I straight up ask everyone. Like we're figuring out like what might have caused you to reach out to GreenPath. And what's really interesting, and one thing I do notice is it's usually not a quick referral, meaning there's people that have someone in their life that maybe is aware of GreenPath, whether it's someone they know personally, whether it's someone from their credit union. I had a client that even had their therapist referred them to us. But it's rare that it's like that first mention that they immediately will run to make that call. It's just one of those where like they receive it, they're like, huh, that's interesting. But there's like this cognitive dissonance of like, am I really in that situation? And it's usually then something else happens, and then it just kind of pushes them over that mental edge in a sense, and then the action is taken. So it's sort of like a change management in a sense of just like getting to the point where you're like, I think I'm at the point where I could benefit from reaching out to someone. And this is human psychology, right? Like I do this for a living, and I went through a divorce a few years ago, and my finances took a hit as this happened. And then I got back on my feet, and I was doing okay, but I lacked a plan because I hadn't really reset my financial plan based on me being newly single. And doesn't matter. Like I have all the financial knowledge in the world. Again, I do this, but really hard to do that for your own budget. And so it took me, and I didn't even have the barrier of like knowing who to call. Like I knew exactly who to call. I have a financial planner that I've referred friends and clients over the years that I did work with. But to get me to like reach out to her, set it up, it took longer than it should have at the end of the day. And then when I did, lo and behold, right, great, I got a great plan going. Why didn't I do this earlier? And I say this to say, like, don't feel bad if you take longer than, and like there's always like, I wish I would have gotten to you guys earlier. Like that is a very common thing. That's okay. You came to us at the right time, whenever that time is.
Yeah, hindsight being 2020. Also, like being able to look at your own situation. How much of it for you did you feel was like, I know what I'm doing. I have this career that I understand all this financial stuff. Obviously, I don't need to go do this. I can wing it and be just fine. But somebody from the outside looking in, you mentioned that somebody being like, hey, have you heard of GreenPath? And then being like, no, that's cool. I'll look into it, type of a thing. And then eventually, yeah, exactly. And then just being like, okay, well, now I'm noticing, now I know I can't handle this. You have to have that self-reflection moment of being like, okay, I do need somebody else to come in and help me with this. And then you're like, oh, top of mind, somebody mentioned this GreenPath company. I can go to them, my credit union, my counselor, whoever's told me, hey, maybe this is the thing that you need. How much of that is, like you mentioned, human psychology? How much of that is ego-driven versus I'm just not quite ready to face this yet?
I think sometimes it could be ego-driven, but I think it's more likely like the not being ready to face it is probably a little bit more common with that, because it just looking at your finances could just dredge up way more than money at the end of the day, right? It could be that like deep down like, oh, I can't really afford to stay living here. I can't really afford this car. Wow, I guess I need to think about like just switching my career or getting a part-time job, or like there's often going to be hard decisions to make these work. And so like for me, it was one of those things where like I was just enjoying life and really not thinking much about where my money was going at the time. And I knew the second that I met with my financial planner, like the fantasy was going to be gone. And like I intentionally scheduled, I had a trip scheduled in July. I'm like, I'm not going to meet with her until after that trip because like I don't want to have that in the back of my mind and then be miserable thinking like, what am I doing? I just want to be blissfully, in my blissful ignorance on the trip, and then I'll deal with reality. And I did, and it worked out. But at the same time, that can get people in trouble when it comes to navigating credit card debt or other high interest debt, of course. So I'm not necessarily suggesting you go on vacation first, but it just goes to show you that like this is tough psychological work for sure.
Yeah, and it's easy to take a look at something and be like, I've got this really nice thing coming up. I'll deal with the hard thing after that. I could also see the other side being like, I've got this vacation coming up. I don't want this weight hanging on my shoulders. Let's deal with it before going on vacation so then I can relax on vacation. Unless, of course, the weight on your shoulders tells you to cancel the vacation, at which point now you're kind of sad that you missed out on it. That story in and of itself is interesting. What other real stories do you have that maybe some of the listeners could link back to their own life, their own experiences, some of the stories that you've heard over time?
Yeah, I have a few. The first few were related to guests I've interviewed in the podcast. I had this one individual who a credit card offer just showed up in his mailbox when he was like 18. And he was sort of brand new to money, didn't really understand how it worked. And it happened right before the holidays. And he jokes that like he was just swiping like a ninja that holiday season. And it was all out of the kindness of his heart. Like he was buying gifts for his loved ones. But that's how what ended up being something like $30,000 worth of debt, credit card debt eventually crept up all from that moment. But he did eventually have a friend, a coworker that referred him to us, and he did find us and subsequently got out of debt. I remember one woman was really struggling just with some mental health types of issues, and so her first step was finding a therapist, and then it was through that therapist that she then got referred to us. So it was like she was tackling the mental health side of things, but the money was really tied up in that at the same time. We had one of our clients that she had well over $100,000 worth of. Uh, in that case, not even necessarily. I mean, though that does happen a lot. With this particular one, I don't think that necessarily happened, but yes, that is a thing, right? Like just shopping addiction and things like that. That is a theme that we saw for sure. And then the other podcast guest I remember, she had a significant amount of debt, well into the six figures, due to the combination of a divorce and before that, like a house remodel that had gotten quite expensive. And then in the middle of it, she was paying off her debt. She actually worked for one of our other credit union partners, got onto a plan with us. Hurricane Katrina hit. She was dealing with the pandemic, so she definitely had some things out of her control while this was happening, but still found a way to get that to get it paid off. But I think my favorite story is I think back to very early on in my counseling days. Gentleman, I greet him, sit him down in the office, and like I didn't have any sense that this was going to be an emotionally charged situation at the beginning because he seemed very calm. And then he just lost it. Like he just started sobbing. And I'm like, this feels like it's more than the debt. And it turned out that, so the amount of debt wasn't shocking to me. He had like $100,000 worth of debt, but he had really good income. But what was really making him so emotional is he had just revealed this debt to his fiance. And when she found this out, the wedding was off. And it was the weight of that was really hitting him. And I remember I was like really nervous because again, I'm a brand new counselor at the time. Like, I really hope this works out. As I'm looking at his budget, I'm like, he could do this. Like on paper, other, the emotions aside, not to minimize that, but the numbers work. He was in a position to pay this off. And so I got him onto a plan. He very successfully paid it down. In fact, paid it off ahead of schedule. But the kicker, and he didn't even say this, I just remember him because, there's a memorable story that it's the emotions involved is not an everyday thing. He called me and he said, hey, I have enough money. I want to pay this off. And then he mentioned to me that he had twins that were had just been born. And I'm like, I put two and two together, like, that was the same guy with the marriage. Like, well, clearly the marriage happened. And, it's just an amazing thing of like these two lives may not have ever happened if it wasn't for him taking that step to do something about his debt. So that was the most memorable one for me.
An interesting story, because that is one of those things. We've had a podcast before where we talked about merging finances when it comes to marriage and how people deal with that. And that is one of those conversations. If you're looking at a lifelong partnership with somebody, money is going to be a major factor in that, and finding a way to work together to make sure that you're financially solvent, secure, is a pretty big deal. I wonder how much of that the wedding is off was the kicker for him to finally step up, do something about that as an ultimatum, which then got them back into that path moving forward. That's a fantastic story. As you were telling about the first guy with his first credit card at 18, I mean, it brought me back to my first credit card when I was in college. I used it to buy a very nice video card for my computer at the time, and that video card ended up costing me probably twice the actual value of the thing, because I was a dumb kid who didn't pay off the thing when I could have, and just let that kind of run for a while. Minimum payment type scenario got to a point where I was like, oh, this is more than necessary. I wasn't anywhere in ridiculous ranges of hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, but I mean, I looked at a couple $100 on that card, and I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to have to keep an eye on what I use this thing to spend on. But yeah, that like, you get it, you suddenly have that. It reminds me of certain things like the TV show Schitt's Creek, where he has his write-offs, doesn't understand what a write-off is. Like, no, that's when the government pays for it. Yeah, you just write it off. and walking into those scenarios, best of intentions, you think you're doing the right thing, and end up kind of seeing yourself slide down that hill a little bit.
Yeah, and that's right. You hit it right there. As even going back to that story of the person that was charging as an 18-year-old, it wasn't. It's sort of like, once that boundary, that line is crossed, where you're just using it a little bit more, then all the subsequent decisions just seem that much easier. It's like, wow, I'm already in $5,000 worth of debt. What's another $500? What's another? And then eventually you wake up to it. And by the way, in his case, it was also, I think what got him serious about it is he met someone who he eventually married and started a family, and very similar situation where he's like, I better tighten up and figure this out, or else that's going to be an issue, especially because he had a spouse that was had a different approach to things and wanted to make sure they were both on the right track.
How often do you get people reaching back out to you after the fact to thank you for things? Like you mentioned, the guy saying, I can pay this off. He was obviously still in the program because he was ready to finalize that. Do you get any of these previous clients that you've helped that reach out to you a year or two later and say, hey, everything is smooth sailing, it's all thanks to you?
I think back to when I was a counselor, I would usually get those types of calls like at the tail end of the program. Getting them a year or two later, less so. And it's actually one of the things I love about the podcast so much is, even though I may not have been the person individually that was counseling this person, I'm having those follow-up conversations. In fact, some of our guests, we've had follow-up episodes and just kind of tracking them afterwards. One thing I will say is, like, it's not always a linear thing, right? Like we try to have this story arc of like, all right, person gets into debt, seeks some help or figures something out on their own, pays it down, everything's fine, life is like sometimes it works like that. But a lot of the follow-ups, there's unexpected other things that happen, and life's more complicated than that sometimes.
Yeah, hurricanes and such, obviously impacting global pandemics. Like, yeah, life can be messy for sure. And if you're making your way out of a situation that's already kind of tough, any of those type of things are going to create those hiccups. But that makes for interesting storytelling for certain.
Yeah.
So where can people go to find Real Stories, your podcast, if they want to catch up on some of these wonderful kind of interesting arcs that you've been talking to us about?
Yeah. So we do post them on our website. So you can go to greenpath.com/real stories. It's also on any of the major podcasting platforms. So wherever you listen to podcasts, if you just do a search for GreenPath Real Stories, they'll be there. And we just released our 70th episode. So there's plenty of stories that hopefully will resonate with your own situation. Yeah.
So as we get ready to kind of wrap up this episode, do you have any final thoughts for people that are out there listening that might be feeling themselves sliding into that debt, or think that maybe they should be looking out for some red flags?
I would just say it's not always obvious. Like we were talking earlier about the idea of like talking to a third party, getting that different perspective. And yeah, I mentioned, oh, I had the financial planner I talked to, or there's counselors, there's your credit union. Not everyone has that professional source that they either know of or are comfortable reaching out to. So my best advice is just talk to someone, right? So you look at the podcast guest of mine who her step was to find a therapist. She wasn't doing it to help her finances. She was just trying to improve herself. So like talk to anyone, whether it's a friend, it's a family member, like getting your story out there. For one, it could be cathartic to express it, right? And just to kind of get yourself unstuck and out of that shame spiral. But then the other part of it is, as you talk about it with someone, you never know, because that other person may have either their own similar situation, maybe they just haven't shared something, or even if they don't, they know someone that has, and that could kind of get the ball rolling. You know, people are inherently helpful. So if you speak it out loud in the world, then you never know where it might lead you. And eventually, hopefully, it could lead you to a good place that can help get you to a better place.
Yeah. For anybody out there listening, you've heard me say it before, Hapo offers free financial coaching for anybody, not just members. Anybody in the community can reach out and schedule a financial coaching session with any of our certified financial coaches. This is a free service out to the community. If you don't have somebody that you can feel like you can go out and talk to about your situation, but you do want to get it aired out there, because like we're saying here, sometimes just getting it off your chest, that cathartic nature can be the first step into eliminating that stress in your life and getting your finances under control. Reach out to any of the Hapo financial coaches, and if they see that you might need some additional help beyond just what they can provide, they might suggest to you that you look up GreenPath, because we're one of those credit unions that works with GreenPath. We recognize the great uses and help that they can provide to people out there who are in financial troubles, and to kind of get a handle on that. It sounds like the vast majority of stories that I'm hearing here are, once you've taken that step and gotten past that initial shame, if you want to call it that, that initial concern about that, you're going to feel a whole lot lighter. Once you get this under control, you're going to feel a whole lot better about your situation. However you get there, all of us want to see everybody feel financially solvent and safe and have a good, solid foundation underneath them. Chris, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. The Real Stories are fantastic. For everybody out there, go check out Real Stories, GreenPath's financial podcast with Chris. And until next time, this has been Dollars and Cents, Hapo Community Credit Union's Financial Literacy Podcast. See you later.